Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Interviews. I am your host, Matt Presti. Thank you for joining us. To start, I'd just like to touch on the Homecoming Conference that went off in September. It was a great experience. We had some 43 people attend. That includes the speakers and staff and alumni, as well as several members from our Science and Research Committee. It was a great time, very informative. You can view all of the presentations at the YouTube page or by going to philosophy.org and clicking on videos, which will open up several playlists that have multiple different videos on the Russells and Russell-related works. There are also many updates taking place with more frequency on the website. For instance, we have many more issues of Fulcrum magazine that have been published and uploaded. You can get to that by visiting philosophy.org and clicking on the articles. Lots of great stuff there, and thanks goes out to our webmaster, Ramu Shagis, for all his hard work. Please visit the bookstore. As you can see, there are book links on the front page as well. This helps to keep the work and these teachings going out to the world, as well as supporting the university, which is a 501c3 corporation, not for profit. So we ask that you help to support the mission. All of this is helping to take the university onto the world stage, as well as keep these teachings going out to the world. We also have goals set to create a new museum, a new campus with a fine arts center, a media center, a state-of-the-art science and research facility, and every little bit helps. I'd also like to take a moment of silence to honor Joseph Byron Yount III, who was our chairman of the board. He refolded October 2nd, 2016, and he will be dearly missed by all of us. He was just a wonderful human being, author, member of so many different organizations, and he truly did serve his fellow man in so many ways that enriched the lives of all those whom he knew. We are going to do a fundraiser next month in January. That will be streaming live on YouTube, and you can join our Science and Research Committee live and ask questions, as well as just hear the latest updates with our prototype. Very exciting times here. We are doing so much and staying so active, and this brings us to our guest today, Darren Colomb. Darren hails from South Burlington, Vermont, and has recently relocated to one of the homes on the mountain there near Swannanoa, where our headquarters is in Virginia. And he is excelling at the work, the scientific work that we're doing. And it's just a great honor to have him join us. His contribution to this work is going to bring the empirical side, the evidential side, to satisfy even the staunchest of scientists whose senses are the only things that can verify reality. So if that's what they want, that's what they're definitely going to get. And it's very exciting to be doing work with our Science and Research Committee. We'll get into that more. But for the meantime, sit back and enjoy this interview. And with that, I'd like to welcome Darren Colomb. Welcome to Interviews, Darren.
Thank you.
I figured we start out this conversation today. As usual, I like to ask guests what led them to the Russell teachings. How did they get into this specific field of philosophy and science that is unique to these teachings? And if you'd like to go ahead and tell everyone that story, that'd be great.
Well, I've been a scientist pretty much my whole life. I remember being interested in science from a very young age, and mathematics, and I had a lot of inventive qualities even at a young age. I was like messing around with all sorts of Legos and my vacuum cleaner parts, whatever was lying around the house. And so I had a very traditional academic course throughout my life. I went all the way up to a bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry. And very traditional, very sort of straight and narrow path. And it wasn't until my early 20s that after graduating college, I sort of went through some personal, I guess you'd say, personal growth, personal exploration, and went through a transformation in body and mind. And that sort of prepared me for opening up my mind to a lot of new possibilities, especially within the sciences. I started to become aware of certain things I was taught that were maybe not quite accurate, based on sort of a more natural premise, which is I found myself spending a lot of time in nature specifically. Mm-hmm. And so that all kind of happened over a period of a year or two, and then I began to become very fascinated with the idea of biological transmutation, especially the work of Louis Kerr-Brown, because I was very interested in health, and so I was really diving in deep into anatomy and physiology and sort of the more esoteric sides of that, and that's what led me into biological transmutation. And I thought that was just one of the most fascinating things to consider, and seems to go against what I was taught in my chemistry courses. So that inevitably led me through just the internet. Somebody had mentioned Dr. Russell's transmutation experiments at Westinghouse in 1927. So I immediately went to the philosophy.org website and bought a little blue book called The New Concept of the Universe, and sounded like a good title. I read lots of other books with similar kind of themes, like Stephen Hawking and Brian Greene and all those guys. So I said, why not add one to my collection? Well, when I read that book, needless to say, I had to read it multiple times before anything even started to make sense. But I did know when I saw the spiral periodic table, and Walter was saying that the elements were tones, as in musical tones, something inside of me said that that was 100% correct, and that all kind of particle-based theories of chemistry and elements was inadequate, to say the least. So that it was kind of the beginning of it, and what followed was just an explosion of interests that I had to just know I had to learn everything that Walter was talking about, because I always wanted to know sort of a grand unifying understanding of the universe and how I fit in with it. I think most people do.
Indeed. How would you say that after completing that book, how did it affect you on a level of speaking of grand unified theory? I know a lot of people may have been aware of Thomas Campbell's big toe theory, but I had looked at that myself and just really didn't get quite the complete feeling until encountering the work The Secret of Light, which really was that sense of completeness.
Well, obviously the first thing you notice when you read New Concept is he's freely, openly mixing God and science, which is kind of a taboo thing to do in science, especially in I was working in a professional scientific field, and I learned that that's kind of you don't really mix the two, So what I was dealing with that book was a very personal journey, which is your own relationship with God, whatever you want to call that, whether it's, I think of it now at this point more as mind, my mind, and so it's it got me to realize that God isn't some external thing out there that you have to spend your whole life trying to find. It's literally, it's your moment to moment thoughts, the things inside your own head that only you know and nobody else really knows. The very personal things, that is what God is, really, to me anyways. And so that book allowed me to investigate that, which is kind of what I was doing anyway with my body and my health. But this allowed me to have an even deeper understanding of how God relates to what we think to be our physical universe. Matter and space, energy, electricity, magnetism, all of these things, these physical manifestations, and how God as mind can not only relate to these things, but is imperative. You cannot have a physical universe without mind. And so it's a big transition, and you certainly don't do it all at once. It takes many years, or you could even say it takes many lifetimes.
It's well said. I often say that it's like akin to learning a second language. You just can't expect to speak Chinese after one reading. You have to
Yeah.
spend several years, and then in theory, the practice of thinking in these new ways, upgrading terms that exist with new definitions, and just being able to, seamlessly see the universe as opposed to in broken up, compartmentalized fashion. And that's one of the things Russell was so incredible with, is he had the freedom of the artist to pursue a scientific inquiry, and as he was gifted from his vision, his illumination, if you will. And that's something we so rarely encounter these days. And you could see the poeticness that he was able to write in that free form with that free mind. And it was really the beauty of the wording and the way he could marry the concept of science with the ideas of spirituality, which go far back into the past in the Eastern traditions and mystical West. So yeah, it's just an incredible writing style to encounter.
Yeah, and he was, what struck me was he was a Western man, and I was sort of also kind of getting into the work of Alan Watts, who has a big influence on me as just a philosopher. And he was exceptionally good at translating more of these Eastern philosophy ideas into a language that Western people could understand. And his whole crux was, how can you possibly know your own civilization, your own the way you've structured your relationships with other people if all you've ever experienced is a Western ideal? What about juxtaposing it with an Eastern philosophy, which has a completely different concept, really, of your relationship to other people and the universe? And so it was a lot of this during the 60s and 70s when he was introducing these ideas, had a huge impact on certain counterculture, whatever you want to call that. So, but here again in Russell was sort of the same thing. He was applying concepts that were entirely foreign, or at least somewhat foreign, and moving in and completely revamping the scientific paradigm and adding in these ideas of spirituality and the source of creation, the metaphysics, the why. Mm-hmm. Science is very good at the how, but we don't really know the why, and here was a man who was an artist but was a master scientist because he understood the why of things.
Very well said. And that question why is probably the most fundamental of all questions for getting to the bottom of things.
Yeah, it's imperative. Russell has often said you can answer all questions with one word, and that one word is balance. And try it out. Really, if you've been trying to tackle some question and you really haven't made any headway, just think about that balance. Think about it, hold it in your mind, visualize it, see how it connects to everything else. That's one of the biggest lessons that we need to teach scientists, especially young ones, is that you need to see things as one consistent whole and see how they all interact and work together, just like systems of gears. When one turns, the other turns. Doesn't matter if one's going fast or slow. They're all geared to each other. And if you can look out your window and see how the atmosphere is just as equally interchanging with solid matter, and how plant life is interchanging with sunlight, it is all one whole thing. And the more you can see that, the more you can answer any question, because the questions are really polar opposites. So the easiest way to answer a polar opposite is to realize that the fulcrum in the middle is where the real concept is, where the real idea is, and always has been.
And this is akin to the trait of waking meditation, when we can walk through life as a fulcrum. You reside with the dwelling place of the still small voice. So all the things that you encounter, which seem to be dual in nature, are basically voided and leveled and balanced with the awareness that is moment to moment of being that fulcrum and moving through life with a sense of purpose. We've discussed also about knowing versus sensing, and there's a lot of people on the internet who like to claim that they know about Russell's work, and some that we encounter really come across with, I hate to use the word bastardized version of his teachings, but for instance, we encountered someone recently who posted that the desire for good health actually creates sickness in the body. And could you touch on that briefly?
Well, that's just not the way it is. If that were the way, I would be a very sick person right now. But I'm not. I'm a very healthy person, and I've really transformed my health. And I can say that with confidence because I've gone through it. It's a personal. It was a very visceral experience, and nobody can take away personal truths from you. They are your own. You own them. Nobody can say anything or do anything to you that removes the truth that you know in your heart, in your soul. And so that comment sort of struck me in a powerful way, because that person is suffering from a terrible lack of understanding. If that really was the way it worked, then everything that you did in terms of acting to fulfill your desire it'd be like rolling a giant boulder uphill. The universe would constantly be fighting you. And that's not the way it is. When you know what you want in life, and you have the desire let's just say in a quality space, it's not a quantity, it's not a physical quantity. It's simply a quality. You have a desire. Hey, I want to increase my health. I want to be a healthy person. If your desire is sufficient enough, you begin to extend that desire into your actual actions. And the actions are the simple things like changing your diet, drinking more water. And the more you do this, the more it becomes intuitive, where you don't even have to sit down and plan your day out. It suddenly becomes second nature, or muscle memory almost. And that's when the universe is supporting you. You gain momentum. You gain a universal kind of momentum, because basically God is saying, hey, this person knows what he wants, and he's actually working toward that end, and I will assist him. Because that is exactly what God is. That's what love is. Love is giving for re-giving. If you give out what you want, you will be re-given what you want. It's simple mechanics. To get it backwards is a terrible, terrible mistake, because you're going to be trapped on either end of the seesaw when you really need to get yourself to the fulcrum and see the way that polarity really does work and how you fit into that. The more you can see how you fit into it, the more you will have control over your reactions. You have control over your actions, but the reaction is sort of the universal swing of the pendulum. And you can only control that by seeing the mirror of it, duality of it.
Yeah, so in a sense, the knowledge removes the need for guesswork. So when you operate from your fulcrum, there's no need to guess what the reaction would be. You already know it. And so desire for a healthy body with knowledge, like avoiding fast food, soda, excessive milk intake, things like that, you know, chemicalized foods, processed foods, just this simple knowledge, you know, that helps to create the effect, which is a healthy body. So you're operating from a point of knowledge, not a point of effect. So you can remove the reaction from being a negative one if you use knowledge. So that's a gauge that we can look at in our own behavior, in our own walking through life, that when you operate from that central center, being the central mountain, as Black Elk would call it, or that stillness, that point of stillness, as so many other mystics and authors and people who have experienced that place, they call a zone in sports. But moving through intentionally and purposefully, knowing what is going to come from your thinking, avoids the need for unnecessary lessons, or basically removes the roadblocks, things that will block you in your progress. So yeah, it's important to have that back of your back of all who walk through this life trying to make a better world, is to operate from that point. I want to ask you, the new concept, you had finished that. What was your next work, and when did you really start to say to yourself that this is beyond what I had ever thought? And what were the next works and where did you go with it at that point?
I remember walking through, there was a place called Zen Gardens, and it was near where my college was. And so I would go there it was really beautiful. And so I would take new concept and I would read it among these sort of beautiful scenic places. And then I would go for walks in the woods, which I still love to do to this day. But I remember reading on page 122, I believe, the page where he's talking about the Westinghouse experiments with transmutation, and he was able to change 3 cubic centimeters of H2O into nitrogen and inert gases. And I remember having the thought that that I have to figure out how that was done. It was a very, very strong urge, as if somehow I knew that there weren't many people that had the understanding of how that could be possible, and that I wanted to know that. So what I didn't realize is that would take an enormous amount of study, and it would take an enormous amount of forgetting concepts, or just getting rid of sort of an old conception, letting it go and replacing it with a new one. Now, the important thing to realize is that it is a replacement, because it can be uncomfortable for a scientist, especially a professional one, to realize that perhaps your entire education, the information you were given, was something other than truth. But it's a personal journey. I didn't care so much whether I was right or wrong. I really just wanted to know what the universe is and how it works. I want to know what it really is. I don't really care if my theory is right or wrong, or someone else's theory is right or wrong. But with Russell, I had a strong urge that he was an individual who knew what he was talking about. He was shown specific things for specific reasons. And moreover than that, what impressed me was the fact that he had predicted elements. It wasn't just that his theory may have suggested that there would be things such as deuterium or tritium, plutonium or neptunium. He actually predicted these things. They were on his table, copyrighted in 1926, some time before these elements were actually isolated and discovered. So that was impressive, because it's extremely rare in the history of science for people to make those kinds of predictions and to know full well that they are there. It means you have knowledge that precedes any kind of theoretical assertion. So the books I went into next, well, I remember spending a long time just scouring the internet. There wasn't a whole lot on Russell aside from your videos with Robert and a few other websites. And I think I went into, I think the next one I got was Secret of Light. And then Atomic Suicide, which was much more, that helped me clarify a lot of the science. It seemed going back and forth between Atomic Suicide and New Concept was where I built a lot of the foundation. And from there, yeah, I was just watching a lot of videos. There was lots of videos on YouTube that were good for visualization. But I was doing a lot of the work just reading the books and thinking about it. And thinking about it before I'd go to bed and having new insights when I'd wake up, things like that. That was a big help.
Now, I know you mentioned too that, you know, the home study course 3rd edition was very relevant to you. Can you touch on that briefly?
Yeah, well, I did. Oh, so I did buy the home study course 4th edition. And I went through it, but I found it to be basically an expanded version of a new concept. In other words, it was basically written in the same time period. And so it was more or less just a longer version of that with some more of the philosophical, touching on more of the philosophy. But it was, I think it was, I listened to an interview with you and Robert where you had said that the 3rd edition was the final that the two of them, Walter and Lao, had worked on together, and it was really the fruit of all their labors in the realm of the course. So I contacted Joey Korn and I bought the home study course again. So I actually have two of them, two different editions. And yeah, it is quite different. I found it to be much more of a brainchild of the two of them, as you had stated. And again, it was around the same period as Atomic Suicide, and so it bears a lot of the, let's just say, revisions or clarifications that the two of them, from putting their two minds together, really came up with in terms of the science. So Unit 10 and 11 is really, really good. It's got a good, solid foundation for building on the rest of the concepts. There are just some things that Russell never really talked about again. If you compare Universal 1 to Atomic Suicide, I mean, he never mentions the 18 dimensions ever again. And instead, he talks about dimensions in more of a mathematical realm where you have length, width, and height, which is, I can see why he did that, and it's much more clear to scientists and physicists who are already kind of familiar with the Cartesian sort of layout of dimensions. So there was reasons I can see from his work why he changed some wordings. I mean, the concepts are always the same, but the exposition can be clarified and sharpened, certainly.
Thanks for that, Darren. Just a note to our listeners, the home study course 4th edition is going to be discontinued. We have about probably 100 copies, maybe a few extra to sell. And once that is sold out, we are going to revamp the home study course 3rd edition. We'll update the pictures to make sure they're top quality. That will take place with our webmaster, Ramu Shagis, who will be assisting in the republication of the 3rd edition so that it can be in its own binder and just everything sharp. And so we're going to go back to that because it is just simply more true to what they were trying to teach. And as well, there is probably a need for a video at some point where we will do a comparison between the two and why we're going back to the third edition. But nonetheless, Darren, I want to speak to about Westinghouse. I know you've been taking a lot of time. You relocated recently to the mountain there in Afton, Virginia, and are able to have gone through much of the archives. And in particular, Westinghouse, as you spoke to his transmutation experiments, what have you been able to fish out of there that's interesting, that would give some candy to the listeners as far as more evidence of his work in Westinghouse and what he was able to achieve that is of major significance?
Well, we have several items in the archives that support his assertion that he was able to demonstrate transmutation of elements. We have spectrographic analysis. Granted, this was 1927, so they didn't have high resolution, but they were able to confirm that what came out of his transmutation experiment was not what went in, and he was able to duplicate it 17 different times with 17 different results. We also have his diary from this period, which entails a lot of the more specific details of the actual experimental apparatus, which is certainly of untold value in terms of trying to replicate the experiment successfully. We also have a lecture, a reel-to-reel recording of a lecture he gave in 1952 in the summer classes at Swannanoa, where he basically tells the entire story of his time at the Westinghouse laboratories. It's interesting why he got a space there. He had actually solved for them a problem of plating chromium, nickel and chromium. And he solved that problem for them in like less than 10 minutes because he had full knowledge of the chemical elements and their relation to male and female. And so they were looking for a catalyst in the wrong gender. And so he solved that problem for them, and in exchange, he was granted a secret laboratory where he would lock himself away, and he wanted to test something out. And when word got around that he was getting elements out that weren't the same as what he was putting in, a lot of the staff members at Westinghouse were quite intrigued by this. And so he became quite popular. But again, as he tells the story, even though he demonstrated it 17 different times and using different analyses, the scientists there simply would not believe it. And, he said, where can you get in the world of science if you can show them something like that and they still won't believe it? Because it doesn't fit their paradigm. It doesn't fit the dogma. And but the records are quite clear, and more than that, his science is very seamless. There should be no reason that what he's saying does not hold true. So if he understands the true construction of matter and how it is projected from stillness, he would have the knowledge to change any element into any other element that he so desired.
And I think I should let the listeners know here that one of the great things of you coming to the headquarters there in Virginia is your discovery of 123 audio lectures, some being just music of him on organ and piano. This is where, of course, you heard this mention of the Westinghouse and the work that he did. So listeners, Darren is compiling all of this onto WAV files and MP3s that we're going to sell eventually a hard drive with all of the audio lectures and the music available. It's basically all of the audio that we have of Dr. Walter Russell. And these are priceless. I mean, I've got the lucky and fortunate opportunity to listen over the phone, being that I'm here in Missouri and you are there in Virginia, Darren, to some of these lectures. Just snippets here and there. So I'm chomping at the bit, waiting to get my own thumb drive. And how are you coming along with the transfers at this point?
I'm through the first 13 lectures, but remember that each lecture is roughly 2 hours long. So
Mm-hmm.
that's actually at least 20 gigabytes of, of audio files.
Wow.
um, some of them require, these were, by the time I have them now, they're actually double transferred. They were transferred from reel to reel to cassette, and now I'm going to cassette to the digital. So, some of them need to be cleaned up. There's some hiss and tape noise that needs to be cleaned up,
Mm-hmm.
so we can make it more presentable. But it should be noted that these are sort of presented more or less as is, and and but they're an absolute amazing capture of a man who is exceptionally genius, and they're really invaluable. It's the closest we can get to having a conversation with him,
Mm-hmm.
beyond the books. And
Right.
I've always felt that there must have existed somewhere some more advanced material for students who wanted to go beyond the books. Um, but of course, all questions are answerable in the light, and you really can't answer any question that you have, even if it's a science question. And I found that to be true, but at the same time, I knew there was more material from that man because he was so prolific. And the fact that we've unearthed these and we're going to make them available to other people is really just, it's what they would have wanted, which is giving this information out to the world, giving for re-giving.
Mm-hmm. An absolute incredible discovery. It's the equivalent of finding a diamond mine. Now, with the to touch on just a little more, the Westinghouse, were you able to compile any evidence of him giving lectures there that are what? I mean, I've seen this maybe mentioned in various documents in the archives, but his lectures at Westinghouse, where he made his predictions for the transuranium elements that he predicted, as well as the tritium and deuterium, was there any confirmation in what you found that certain lectures, or that he did in fact lecture to those who would later claim that they discovered that?
I did find several instances where he recounted giving lectures to various science groups, and more or less the information he gave was usually credited to another person. The largest of which is actually a letter of petition to the Nobel Prize Foundation, where he was trying to appeal to their sense of justice, and by showing documents that he had actually predicted these elements well before their discovery, and that the prizes that were awarded for those discoveries were rightfully his.
Right. A
And Leo,
posthumous award.
correct, and Leo does recount that in some detail in the introduction to Atomic Suicide. But we have the actual, the letters and the proof of all these things. So I've seen them firsthand, and there's probably countless instances where he gave out information early on in the early, somewhere between 1926 and 47, where information he gave out he realized was just being completely ripped off and taking credit under other people's names. But he was.
So often is the case that genius must encounter that kind of poor character from his fellow man, just being so far ahead of everyone else.
Right, and we think of crucifixion in the past as, if you said something like this, you would have been burned at the stake. But in the 21st century, we have a different kind of crucifixion, which is you're just ridiculed as a lunatic, and nobody will take you seriously. And that, unfortunately, was the fate to some degree of his early contributions to science, which were really the led to the atomic age as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
The reason he didn't give out more information was simply because the information he did give out first was used to multiply the power with which man kills other men. And that was an atrocity, which certainly wasn't his goal. So imagine what kind of destruction mankind could wreak on everyone else if he gave out transmutation and energy and so forth.
Right. It almost draws into a moral dilemma of whether or not we as a committee should even pursue this kind of stuff. But again, I think that the human race has never been more ready, in my opinion. And I'd like to touch on a little bit about your work more on a personal level. First off, the homecoming that you did 2 presentations, which are online. You can go to philosophy.org, click on videos, click on the USP Homecoming Conference 2016, and Darren did 2 really excellent presentations there. Do you have anything to comment on concerning those presentations? And then also after that, if you could give us a little bit of an update on the prototype that the committee has charged you with working on.
Sure. Well, the presentations, and I've had to do this a couple times now, where I'm more or less in a position to try to summarize the entirety of Doctor's cosmogony into a short amount of time, and it just needs to be understood that that really can't be done. What I'm talking about and showing in those presentations is really the tip of the iceberg, and the sort of the best of the best of my 4+ years at studying this material, and just my own spiritual progresses, which is, you can't really advance your understanding of the science without the metaphysics, without the spirituality, without seeing how you fit into all of these things and how your neighbor fits into all of these things. Again, it's this holistic mindset is absolutely required to understand what the universe really actually is, and to begin to describe it in scientific terminology. That's why it's a university of science and philosophy, not science and just science. You have to have the philosophy to balance the science and so forth. And so the presentations are good as they are, but understand that the story is much more deeper, and you can really get into some details. But again, you should always see the forest for the trees. You should see it as one consistent thing before you start getting into all the nitty-gritty details.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like trying to summarize Western civilization in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
How does one even begin? That the amount of information is so extensive and so large. But your presentations are absolutely wonderful and have very much helped a lot of people. We have more to come as well. We have a symposium that is taking place in Salem, Missouri on the 16th of December, which is this coming Friday. Hopefully I can get this interviews up by then, so that people who want to partake, you can either come in person. It is in Salem, Missouri. And the other option is to buy a ticket on Skype and watch from your Skype app. So you will be presenting there at the symposium, Darren, and you want to give a little bit of a intro as to what you're going to present on.
I'm going to cover some more in depth of I guess you'd say electrical science, or viewing circuits and different things in a different way. I mentioned briefly in covering coils at the homecoming that if you change your conception of how things move in circuits and what electricity really actually is, rather than a sort of a flow of electrons, which is the sort of standard academic way of describing it, all sorts of interesting possibilities come about as that. And so I want to give just a sort of a foundation of of what the electric current is, how it relates to your life, how it relates to motion and matter, all of these kinds of things. And I'm really covering that because my work really is involved with me thinking about that almost all the time. So, and you had asked about what I'm working on, and basically I'm working on solutions to the energy problem, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. Alternative energy. In no way do I want to be put in the realm of free energy, because there's I'll just say it now, there's no such thing as free energy. Everything is in its place in the universe as it should be. But there are two cycles. There is an entropic downhill flow of energy, which man has utilized, you might even say bastardized, because of the explosion-based technology. But there is an uphill flow of energy, a gravitational flow of energy. And that can be engineered just as much as the downhill flow of energy can be. When you use the two together, you have basically systems where you can recharge as you discharge. So it's not free in that sense, but it is lawful. It holds true to the actual mechanics of the universe. And it's simply something new. It's not that it breaks the laws of physics. It's that it works with nature, and it's a new concept which has not entered into the realm of man's thinking yet. It's very, very slow. These things take a very long amount of time because man's unfolding takes a long amount of time.
Could you give a little more in detail about what you're doing as far as the prototype is concerned?
Well, it's taking shape in many different ways. Our primary prototype basically consists around improvements regarding alternators, or what Tesla's invention is a rotating magnetic field. But since Russell was one of very few people on this planet who understood what magnetism and electricity actually is, using his cosmogony as sort of a Rosetta Stone for understanding what's actually happening in a generator, what's actually happening when a load is put onto a set of coils with a rotary magnetic field and all these kinds of things. The conception of it behind what's actually really happening is totally different. And so certain drawbacks or hindrances in the design start to make themselves apparent to you when you change your concept of it. So what I've done is changed certain aspects of the alternator in order to really improve its efficiency well beyond what we would think to be unity or 100% and beyond. Because really all you're doing is you're turning one form of energy into another. You're taking mechanical rotation and you're making the corresponding output of electrical watts or power. And the conversion can be altered just as the same way as you can alter the conversion of mechanical force in a crowbar to lift a heavy amount of weight. If you shift the fulcrum, or seemingly shift the fulcrum by extending the lever and shortening it on one side, now you have leverage. And all I'm applying to the realm of mechanical to electrical conversion is simply leverage.
So ultimately, this kind of technology would serve as an upgrade to all existing technology, which could be applied everywhere in a reasonable time and fashion, which would also give us a way to save on the amount of fossil fuels being used to basically turn that into ancient history and move forward in the progress of humanity toward a green world, a truly green world.
Right. I'm not looking to usurp the power distribution system we have in place. I'm simply aiming to improve it to the point where we no longer need to use fossil fuels, which is a problem, and it will continue to be a problem so long as we need diesel or gasoline to run a motor, an engine that simply turns a rotating magnetic field. inside of coils, which moves the current from, you're displacing the power of the magnet, so you're making them work at a distance. So if you can increase the efficiency with which that is happening, that conversion is taking place, and as I said before, you can recharge as you discharge, then the prime mover no longer needs to be from exploding fossil fuels. The prime mover can be an electric system so long as the output is sufficient to self-motivate, which eliminates the need for all fossil fuel.
Right.
That's always been my primary focus, as a lot of people have had the similar thing. That's why we have solar and wind. Wind is a prime mover.
Right. And we've talked about this at length in many of our science and research committee sub-meetings as well as the main meetings. But what we're seeing is a very practical phasing out over 25 to 50 years of existing technologies into the integration of these new technologies. And things that we're discovering, his work is integral and imperative that these concepts can be demonstrated empirically, which is going to finally, I would like to see that Nobel Prize committee honor Walter Russell's request for that posthumous award. It'll put Russell into the spotlight as he should have been put into the spotlight many years ago.
Absolutely. And we have to understand that he was a messenger. He was a bringer of information at a time when the human race is at a tipping point. The human race must change. It will change because it has to change. The universe is constantly in a flux of change, and life is in that flow. It's not separated from it. So if we don't really take a hard look at the way we're doing things and the way we're coexisting with our planet, we really can have our cake and eat it too, meaning we can have a comfortable life full of all of these wonderful energy technologies, the epitome of our technological unfolding. But at the same time, we can have an understanding of how we need to relate to one another and relate to our planet in such a way that it's not destructive. It can be constructive. We can always take a polar opposite and flip it right around. And that's simply what I aim to do, and a lot of other people are aiming to do. I mean, there's no shortage of creative solutions to having more energy, and energy you don't need to explode fuels to get at. If you can really see that it's a two-way universe, then it becomes completely obvious. I'm not trying to break any kind of laws of physics. I'm trying to say that perhaps those laws are inadequate because they're not based on nature. If we have a nature-based technology, you have no such breaking. You never transcend it. You work with it.
Mm-hmm.
You become it. You become an extension of it.
It's well said. And let's just say this, that you left your home in South Burlington, Vermont, to come down to the mountain, including your job of several years, to pursue this on a more full-time basis. I do want to say that all of our efforts are based on donations from you, the listener, from you, the student, the alumnus of this university. We are going to be doing a live chat fundraiser with our Science and Research Committee at some point in January. The goal is to raise enough for you to live on. So if anyone listening to the show would like to donate, please visit philosophy.org, click on the Donate to Science and Research button, or you can always call us at 800-882-5683 and make your donation over the phone. But we're basically looking for someone to sponsor Darren for a year of research at $40,000. And if there's anyone out there who supports this kind of movement, which is, again, just looking to upgrade existing technology, bring it into tune with nature, and start to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels over a phase-out period. Again, this technology is such that millions upon millions of jobs will be created. You could transfer the entire coal industry over 50 years into this kind of technological application for energy production. It would require upgrades in education and teaching, something that is very much needed if we're going to ever get out of the crisis of character we're in, because currently there's no universities like this one in the world. So, where do you see the future for the university going? And as the lead scientist for the committee, and once we acquire the funding for your salary, we'd sure love to upgrade that title to Chief Science Officer. Where do you want to see this university go in the next few years?
I'd like to see it move into all diversification of technology. For instance, water purification is a big problem. I know radiation remediation is a big problem, and we can certainly tackle that. There's almost no problem that you can't solve once you have a natural-based science and a living philosophy with which to utilize it. The technology will come. It's really just a matter of funding and research, experimentation. I mean, that's really what good science should be. We just have the added benefit of working from a place of knowing what actually constitutes the physical universe, the importance of the wave mechanics, the importance of realizing the unity of force, the unity of gravity. If you know what gravity really is, you can generate as much power as Niagara Falls, because that's the only force that's making that amount of power anyways. Russell would talk about the sort of forming a space power corporation that would revolutionize how we generate power, how we get water. We will be able to transmute the nitrogen in our atmosphere into hydrogen and ignite it with oxygen to produce water at any point, anywhere in the world, even in the Sahara Desert, which means that we can completely revolutionize how we grow food, how we distribute food, the energy that's required to move it from one place to another. Solar energy can be completely reformed. We can increase the power of solar millions of times. We can have stationary systems that transmit power without any wires, wireless power communication. All of these things are completely possible. It's really just a matter of having suitable funding and having enough people who are really interested and passionate about this to really bring it into fruition and manifestation. That's really what I've been doing, is just been passionate enough about it to actually bring it forward. And that's what the legacy of any great person is. It's a person who was passionate enough in life to actually do something about it.
Well said.
I've been in the realm of energy for the past year, 2 years or so, and I think eventually I will, once I'm have certain successes in that realm, and hopefully they lead to certain funding avenues for us at the university, I'd like to move into more transmutation. That was, as I said toward the beginning, my initial impetus in all this was to really understand how transmutation is done, and put it to good use for mankind. So I'll move into that realm, but also water purification is going to be a big thing, and just working with people and increasing the efficiency of whatever system they have in place, because there's always a way to make it more efficient. That's what I've found, really, is if you can understand wave mechanics, you can understand an awful lot about just about everything there is to understand it in mechanical systems or electrical systems, because it's all wave motion anyways, whether you think it is or not. So
Well, that brings me to a point I'd like to ask you a question about. We get a lot of emails, a lot of people saying, what is a field? What is a wave? On a basic level, can you answer that?
what is a field or what is a wave?
In terms of, yeah, Russell's concepts of those two things.
Okay, well, a field, think of a field this way. I want to actually get people to use symbolic analogies in their mind because it allows me to communicate really complex ideas more or less simply, and then you can think about them on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to think about a ball that you hold in your hand. When you hold it in your hand, it's at rest. It's at equilibrium. It's in a certain potential position, but it's not acted upon by anything. It's just sitting there. It's at zero potential. When you throw it up in the air, now it's moving in a direction upwards, and you know what happens? Eventually it'll hit a point where it hits zero and it stops. And then it'll fall back down into your hand and come back to zero. So in other words, what happens is it's at zero, it extends upward to a point of zero where it's suspended. And then it reverses at that 0 point and comes back down to where it began. Within that analogy is everything that you need to understand both what a field is and what a wave is. Because a field is the region, the amount of potential that you've extended from 0 to 0 in order to encompass the entire action of throwing the ball up and having it fall back down. So in other words, a field is a mind extension. It's a way for you to measure out a quantity of desire which will terminate the action that is the impetus of that desire, that the desire actually moves the motion. It actually makes something happen physically in the universe. So a field literally is everywhere. It's a mind construct. It's every motion anywhere, any motion that you see, the moving of a tree in the wind is bounded by a wave field. And it's the wave field distance or proportion is always proportional. It's a ratio to the amount of desire that is mentally extended. So an explosion, for instance, has a wave field boundary. It measures out the entire radii of the explosion and bounds it. So that's what a field is. Now, a wave, as I mentioned, is also in that analogy because from any extension of 0 out to 0 and back to 0 is a wave lever. In other words, it's a gravity shaft. It is an omnipresent point of universal vacuum which is extended by electrical motion around it, which extends it out into any kind of shaft. Mm-hmm. So in other words, we think that the motion that the ball travels is the direction of motion. But it's not. The ball actually, as we said, it never exceeds 0. It starts at 0, it starts at 0, it rests at a point in 0, and then goes back to 0 where it began. That extension in time is a seeming wave shaft. And the potential is not in the direction with which it moved up and down. It's actually 90 degrees from that in spiral vortices or east-west motion. So all motion is east-west. Well, you can't see that. All we really see are the gravity shafts, the wave functions that are registered in a wave field. So that's, in general, that's what a wave is. But you must understand that a wave is everywhere, and everything is simulated by wave extensions because the fulcrum never actually moves. It just seems to move by extending the lever or shortening it on either one side. For instance, two children on a seesaw, you know that they can't begin to oscillate back and forth unless one leans and the other one leans forward. One leans back and one leans forward, which means you've made one side of the lever slightly longer and then the other side of the lever simultaneously is shorter. And with that, now you've disturbed an equilibrium and you've set up motion. Now things will oscillate up and down, wave crest, wave trough. And that is happening in all aspects of motion. I don't care whether it's particles or solar systems. The foundation, the concept behind the motion is always the same.
And so particles really are just smaller groupings of a larger wave. They're smaller waves within a larger wave.
Right, and they're always they're always in a plane that is somehow 90 degrees to the central axis, the central point of gravity.
To the gravity shaft, indeed.
The gravity shaft.
And so that removes the need for a theoretical ether to transfer the wave motions of light.
What people who want to believe in an ether are people who want to believe that everything is fundamentally particles, because it's sort of it is a medium with which that light waves propagate. But light waves do not propagate through a medium. They are extended from non-dimensional points to dimension points and then back again, right? As we said, it's from 0 to 0 back to 0. Or when you add in the octave wave formula, you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So that adds the octave relationship of every octave wave, which is a little more detail. But yes, the ether is, to me, a conceptual crutch. What they're really talking about is the emptiness of space, which Russell points out is not empty. It's actually full of pre-hydrogen octaves, elements that are actually so tenuous or vacuous that we just register to our senses as complete empty space. But it's not entirely empty. Mm-hmm. Anything that is pure vacuum is completely completely beyond our range of sensing, even with instruments. So what you think to be as empty space is not really emptiness. It's gases of such long wavelength that you can't possibly ever detect them with anything like hearing, sensing, smelling, or anything like that.
Exactly. Russell referred to those two as the occluded gases.
Right. And furthermore, the inert gases actually center all particles of matter anyways. For instance, if you were to take tungsten filament in a so-called vacuum tube, which is really still full of pre-hydrogen octave gases, simply lower atmospheric pressure, if you were to electrocute that tungsten, you would find that the body of the particles of tungsten are completely destroyed. You've completely eradicated them. And what is left is, in essence, is helium. And you can detect the helium within the vacuum, mm-hmm. which means that somehow you've destroyed the body of tungsten, but you've liberated inert gases, mm-hmm. which means that they must have been centering all of the particles of the tungsten to begin with.
Right. They're the seeds of the octaves, the master keys of the tones.
Exactly.
And so Russell actually did this at Westinghouse. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah, he did this experiment, and he frequently will bring that up in discussions of how the inert gases relate to the octaves of matter, in that they are the seed of or the soul, if you prefer to say that. By the way, your own soul is located in an inert gas which centers every single particle of your body. So if you want to try to have a visualization for where you actually are, the real you, not your physical body you, but you as soul, it's all within the inert gases, which are ultra microscopic rings within rings at every point in the universe.
And that needs basically a new definition or a new word to describe the process of how the light of mind projects through the inert gases. And I came up with one, energy, I-N-E-R-G-Y, as opposed to E-N. What do you think?
Right. Well, it is within. The inert gases are within everything. Just as when you look at a tree, you know that entire body, that massive amount of matter, was completely enfolded within a seed that fits, in the middle of the palm of your hand. It's very, very tiny. So you know that the entire pattern of that tree is somehow enfolded into an ultra microscopic, beyond microscopic point of more or less non-dimensionality. And as it unfolds into 3 dimensions, it's like a projector where you have a negative film strip could be only a millimeter big, but when you project it through the light onto a screen, now the image is massive. It can fill up an entire theater screen. So you know that dimension is really an illusion of projection.
Indeed. Darren, I thank you for coming on. I have one question left, and this actually comes from someone on our committee by the name of Hannah Van Hook. And she asks, if you could elaborate a bit on the concept of free will. In the wave, everything has its place and time, and those effects can be mathematically precisely calculated. How does free will fit into this, and how is this in accordance with an omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient mind, which is always in control?
It's a great question. The way I think of this is free will means that you consider yourself to be a discrete individual mind. In other words, you are starting from the conception that you have free will, in that you are an individual body, you are separated from your environment, and you have the ability to choose to do anything that you want within that environment. What you don't see, because the senses are so limited, is that every reaction of your action is the universal reverse of the pendulum. In other words, your action is your own because you think your mind to be individual, separated from the rest of the universe. But you don't see that your reaction to that action is more or less God's swing of the pendulum. So you get the first swing, and then God gives the other swing. Now that may seem like you have free will to an extent, but what you have to do is realize that your mind and universal mind are the same one mind. And when you do that, you begin to see that you can desire a certain reaction by adjusting your own actions, which really means that you start to live a balanced life. That's really what that means. When somebody has good luck or are fortunate, that's not just blind chance. What's happening is that they know what they want, and they're taking action in that direction, which means that God will work with you, but not for you. When God works with you, now each swing of the pendulum is equally in the same direction, the direction that you are in fact choosing. Now, in regards to how that affects, things that you can measure out, what's happening is your life is just like a cosmic cinema, and you're an actor in that drama. So things have to unfold. When you take Hamlet, for example, on a reel-to-reel film, you know that the entire idea of Hamlet, the entire story, is on that film. It exists literally all at once. But what you have to do is you have to take it out, and you have to run it from start to finish in order to have a continuity to play out the drama. That's where the order of the universe really comes in. That's where the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, the rhythm is the manifestation of the idea. So it's orderly in that sense because you have to give it a continuity in order to have it be a drama or a start and a finish. And even if you talk about expositions where you have you have a beginning, and then you have a sort of a build-up, and then you have a big surprise, and then you have, so there's even a rhythm within how you tell a story. And if you think of your own life in that way, you realize it has a beginning, it has ups and downs, it has dramas, it has a sort of an orderliness to it in order to simulate what it is. But when you lie your body back down, when you return your body from which you had borrowed it, and you become wholly mind, you'll realize that all of those concepts existed simultaneously, all at once, omnipresence. But you can't see that when your body is polarized, because you yourself are the projector, you see. So just have a thought on that, and perhaps you can work out these things on your own. Hopefully something I said maybe inspires you to think about it in a slightly different way.
That was wonderfully put, Darren. Thank you so much for that. Darren is our lead scientist. Again, if anybody out there would like to fund a year of research for him, we're trying to raise $40,000. And we'd really appreciate anyone out there who would like to see more of this kind of technology and the pursuit of this kind of technology come to the front and center, so we can eventually phase out those entropic only sources of power that damage nature and blow it up in order to get any usable energy out of it. So we appreciate your support of the University of Science and Philosophy, the science and research. We do want to, as a goal, get a new campus eventually. I was speaking with someone on Facebook the other day, Darren, and I said, we want to raise $100 million. And he goes, $100 million, my God. And he goes, that's a lot of money. And I wrote back, well, they wanted to build an Air Force One airplane, and the cost was over $4 billion. So if you put things into context, it's not really that much. But having a fine arts center, a media center, a state-of-the-art science and research facility, and being able to get more than just 2 employees that we currently have now, we're going to need an infusion of capital. We won't be able to just sell books and make it out there. Of course, hardly anyone reads anymore, as we're finding out that the sales of books just aren't what they used to be. But again, I think for those out there that are able, whatever amount you're able to send is much appreciated. And we will be doing so much more in terms of productions. We'll be doing some video production work on the prototype at some point. And that's all within the next few months. We'll get to the change of the year and bring lots more to the table. So we appreciate everyone who has supported the university, all those people who have donated, especially Mr. Bill Cranwell. Thank you so much for your donation. Darren, is there one last final send-off you'd like to give?
I would just say to anybody listening, if you haven't found your passion in life, you owe it to yourself to find it. And you will find that if you always move yourself in that direction with integrity and love and the intention to do well to the rest of the world, the universe will completely take care of you. I've had an amazing amount of support, and people are extremely kind and generous when you intend to do good things for the world. So I would just say, operate from that standpoint, and everything will be so much easier.
And this concludes this episode of Interviews. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for participating, and there will be more to come. Stay tuned to www.philosophy.org. As always, the news and announcements on our social media page, on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. Have a wonderful day wherever you are.